Welcome to another exciting episode of the Speakeasy Club. We're thrilled to welcome Charlie Gilkes, the co-founder of Inception Group, the masterminds behind some of London's most iconic and innovative venues. From the hidden speakeasy allure of Bart's to the immersive, whimsical world of Mr. Fogg's, Charlie and his team have redefined what it means to craft unforgettable experiences in the nightlife scene. With a background in hospitality for over 10 years and a passion for creative storytelling, Charlie has not only revolutionised the way that we think about bars and restaurants, but also fostered a culture of innovation, curiosity and fun within his business. Charlie, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. It's taken a while, but we're here.
Yeah.
So welcome to Speakeasy.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here.
Pleasure. And where we love to get started is always a little bit about you, a little bit about the Inception Group, and then how it all began for you. How did you end up in?
So my very first club night I arranged when I was 13 years old, and I rang the club and I said I wanted to hire the space, and I left a voicemail for them. And that's actually on an answering machine, which used to have not on a mobile, obviously then. And they called back asking for Mrs. Gilkes because my voice hadn't broken. Yeah. And that was when I was 13. And then I started doing club promoting. Brilliant. Took a year out between school and uni. And we did quite well, sort of filling other people's nightclubs. And I've got a business partner. We actually met because I used to run a Tuesday night at this club. And he ran the Thursday night. Brilliant. And then the week before Christmas, we knew that everything was going to be busy. So I booked through the owner the Wednesday. And he, unbeknownst to the owner and me, had booked it through the manager. And so they're double booked. And we were like rivals because I was always trying to have the best night on the Tuesday. And I didn't know who this guy was. And he was always trying to have the best night on Thursday. And then this double booking meant we had to work together. They said, we can't choose between you. Right. You've got to work together. And Duncan turned up with this clicker, and he was like, had all these systems in places, and he had someone clicking behind the cashier, the club cashier, click
Wow.
how much people were paying to get in, and all these checks and balances. And I never thought about that, and realised I'd been being fleeced for the whole year before that. And suddenly thought, well, actually, his skill were quite complementary skill sets, and so we started working together, doing club nights together.
Nice.
And then we heard about this hotel that had an old basement, which had a license to be a club before. And we approached the hotel and said, well, what are you going to do with your basement? And they said, housekeeper's storage. And we said, well, that's a real shame because basements that can be nightclubs and have the licensing are few and far between. Yeah. And their closing words to us were, we're in the business of sleep. And so we unbeknown to them, got some acoustic experts in to show how you could get a lead line ceiling in there. And we came to them this whole proposal about how, if there was a noise complaint from a room, right, it would come off our kind of P&L and we'd refund them. And I think they just I think they just got to the point where they're just so bored of us, and through exhaustion. We went for a night out and showed them a few nightclubs, and these two hoteliers are in their 70s. And I don't think they've ever been to a nightclub before, and it's one of the most awkward nights you can imagine. Their driver driving us around, them holding their hands over their ears.
Gosh, yeah.
But eventually, so that was kind of how we started. So we opened our first venue called Kits, and it was kind of a management contract.
What area was it, sorry, Charlie?
It's in Chelsea.
Oh, brilliant.
Stone
I remember
Square.
that.
Yeah.
I remember that. That's crazy.
Yeah, 2006 we opened that and ran that. And it was a great learning for us because we'd gone from being club promoters. We knew how to fill a space.
Was it narrow?
It was relatively,
Actually remember. That's crazy.
Yeah, so we ran that for 3 years, and it was a great learning for us because we knew how to fill clubs. We didn't know how to operate them. And, I think a lot of people sort of think, well, a bottle of vodka in the supermarket is 15 quid, sell it for 10 times. Right. In a nightclub, there's so much money to be made. Yeah. But obviously there's a lot that goes on in between. Right. Which was a rude awakening for us. But it did really well, and it kind of led us to start up our own business on our own 2 feet and sign our first lease in the end of 2008 to open our first place in 2009. So that's kind of how the journey started. It was interesting for us because actually going from being club promoters to operators in many ways, it was kind of going 4 steps back to go 5 steps forward, because we were doing better commercially, with all these club nights because we had multiple club nights and stuff. Okay. But I think actually, probably it's like footballers, isn't it? You kind of you've got to think longer term. Yeah. And I think the shelf life of a promoter is relatively short.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't what we wanted to be doing when we were kind of in our 40s.
Yeah.
So it was a good transitional move for us.
Brilliant. And like, so you sort of really started in 2009 in terms of setting up. Is that when like Inception?
Yeah, so that was the birth
Born?
of Inception Group. So we were not we were perceived as owners with Kits. We weren't the owners at all.
Okay.
Though these hotel guys owned it. We had a management contract with it, but we were perceived as it being our club. Amazing. But then, I went to New York and saw this bar called Please Don't Tell, which was in a little. You went through a phone box and you picked up the receiver, and it was this kind of secret bar.
Yeah.
Now these things have been overdone, but at the time there was nothing like it in London.
Right.
And we heard about this little residence bar in South Kensington. It was a former squash court, and it was within this really weird building. Called Chelsea Cloisters, and they had a license that allowed people to come from the outside.
Yeah.
And no one had been able to make it work because it had no on-street presence at all.
Right.
And we sort of came up with this idea of creating kind of London's first speakeasy, and it was 2009. It was at the time that Twitter, was really taking off, and I think Twitter was a big factor in the success of it because we never gave the address away.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember, so we signed it in November 2008, and I do remember there was one December day that I kind of walked down this completely dead street into the Chelsea Cloisters, into this freezing cold former squash court in this completely dead building. And for one moment, I really doubted. I was like, what on earth have we done? And the other thing that we did was completely nuts. Although the ignorance of youth in our kind of early to mid 20s was we personally guaranteed that lease. So if that business had gone under, we would have been personally liable.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a crazy thing to do, and I've never done that since, and I'd never do that again.
No,
and I'd advise anyone listening to never personally guarantee something. But I think we had real belief in it, and I always say that if you believe in something, it's quite infectious, and you can get your team to believe in it, and you can get your customers to believe in it.
Yeah. For sure.
So I think Duncan and I had full conviction, and we did our first bar on 20 grand. So
That's really good.
to the whole thing on 20 grand, money we'd saved mainly through our club promoting and through the kits venture we did, and we just. We because we didn't. It was an interesting time because there's just been the big crash, financial crash, sort of scenes of people, leaving their offices with their cardboard boxes on the news.
Yeah.
Probably the worst time to set up a new bar. 50 a week were closing, but interestingly, it was one of those times like pre that everyone had been talking about. These big fit outs. It would be like this new bar, Titanic, has opened, with a £7 million refit and sort of 24 carat gold chandeliers.
Yeah.
And suddenly that kind of thing was really out of fashion.
Right.
And so this little secret bar where people could sort of drink and enjoy sort of privately, and actually this little quirky place that had been done on a shoestring.
Right. Yeah.
And lots of creative things we did, which were kind of by accident. Like from the car boot sales, I bought a big box of 50 teapots for 20 quid.
Nice.
And we used them all mismatching, and we used them for cocktails. But no other bars were doing, sort of cocktails and teapots. But it kind of just happened by accident. I got a whole massive crate of old jam jars, and I think it was like 5 quid. And everyone loved it because they got like. But I mean, I'm now almost embarrassed talking about some of these things because every generic cocktail bar serves a bloody cocktail in a teapot and in a jam jar. By the time it was very novel, and then we kind of thought of lots of fun things. So, it was Bart's. You can never have a favourite child, and you can never have a favourite venue. So, I don't have a favourite, but Bart's will always be the first, and so will always have a special place for me. But we had this idea, so there was a sort of a secret door. You rang a bell.
Right.
They looked through the little shutter. And Bart's, by the way, is still going strong. Just celebrated its 16th birthday.
Wow. That's amazing.
But we thought, well, this is not a members club.
Yeah.
We want regulars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we had this idea of getting a hotel key card system. So you sort of press the key card to let yourself in if you were a real regular. So we didn't ever give them to people in advance. You had to kind of prove you're a nice person and prove you came a lot, and then you were rewarded with this card. And I always remember actually, because I had to call this contractor to buy this system, and they got incredibly excited that I was going to be refitting this hotel with sort of 300 locks to place my order for one. And then if you're a real regular, you got your own tankard above the bar. But there was it was a bit like Cheers. Like the really nice thing was this community that people used to come to Bart's on their own, and you could just turn up. And you would chat to the bartenders, you would chat to other regulars, and it was something lovely about it. And there was a very sad moment in our first year that one of our regulars, sadly, at his Christmas party in the city, got run over and killed. Wow. And I went to the funeral, and I looked around the church, and they were all Bart's regulars.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, there was something. I thought that you don't get in a nightclub. And if I'm honest, we're more bars and nightclubs, and I liked that sort of side of it, that community building, that time of chatting to people. And we have, Bart's has always had this big fancy dress box, and I remember we had this reviewer who came and couldn't find it, was getting quite frustrated, and he ended up in the kitchen of the local Chinese restaurant, and eventually followed the clues and found this, because we never gave the address, found his way to Bart's.
Oh God!
And he said, I walked in. I saw the fancy dress box. I thought, this place is utterly ridiculous. Fast forward an hour, I'm standing dressed as a penguin. And it was, and I think that that sort of thing is a great icebreaker.
Totally.
And it cost us very little, and I think we were always thinking of things creatively. I think when you don't have any money to do something, you spend it wisely, and you actually create some of your best work.
Totally.
You can be quite lazy, just throwing big budget things. We just had to think about every little thing we did. We got this really cool graffiti artist to do this Thunderbirds mural on the front of the bar, which was like fun and colourful, and just shoved the walls with all this bric-a-brac and sort of stuff we collected from the markets. We go to Kempton Market quite a lot. I learned the hard way to shopping on eBay that you should always check the scale. And actually, I've recently come to bite me for Mr. Fogg's. Is I was telling everyone in the office that I bought a grandfather clock for 20 quid, and that if you really look hard, you can get these bargains. Anyway, my grandfather clock turned up in a shoebox, and it was a little doll's house miniature.
Has it made it into the bar?
Which is in our shelf. But no, it's fun. Bart's brings back lots of great memories, and it was the stage of the business we were kind of doing everything. Tom, who was the opening general manager, still a great friend, and was with us for up until 2 years ago for 14 years.
Wow.
So started as a general manager and kind of left as commercial director of the company.
Nice.
Went on to be an MD of another business. We had great times, met some great people, had a lot of fun.
Wow.
And it's really how Inception Group started. And we started with this mission statement to create unique and memorable experiences. And people at the time were a bit baffled about what we were talking about. But I think we've for a long time have understood the importance of experience.
Totally.
And that being front and centre of how people want to spend their well-earned money and time.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it feels like you guys were ahead of the curve in terms of when I think about the London scene and stuff, in terms of creating that experience and making it super memorable. Like, do you feel like that or not?
Do you know what? There were definitely things I think that I look at, and I'm flattered that I feel like there are people who've ended up kind of emulating what we've done and being inspired by it, and I've definitely seen it. And I definitely think probably when I look at one of the ones where we probably it was probably the most cutting edge was actually Bunga Bunga. Because we opened that. So Bart's was the first, 2009. Maggie's, our 1980s nightclub, 2010, and then quite quick succession was Bunga Bunga. And the idea of that was, I felt like London had so many fantastic restaurants. If you wanted Korean food or Argentinian food, whatever you wanted, every cuisine, it was there. Right. But if you just wanted a really fun night out, it was lacking. Right. So, for us, it was all about being entertained and having a lot of fun with a big group. You had some pizzas, there were live acts, there were
Yeah.
You get up on the stage, you sang karaoke rather than just in a sort of sterile booth. And it was silly and it was tongue in cheek. But the other thing we really were the first to do is this idea of a party brunch.
Yeah.
It was a completely new idea, and we were definitely the first. There were a couple of hotels that were doing it.
Nice.
And it was just a new idea. People didn't really use that part of the day. It's always been a big thing in like Asia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I heard about this hotel. It was called the Landmark Hotel, and they were doing this all-inclusive brunch. But it was a very civilized affair. And I tried to go, and it was booked for 3 months. And I thought, actually, the consumer loves this idea of a bottomless play. You know, they know what they're going to spend, and they can do what they want. And so we thought, well, we'll kind of have that idea, but make it very fun. And we had dragioke, drag queens doing karaoke, and we always said, you know, you could have your night out and then be back for X Factor.
Right.
It's nice to see things like that starting trends in many ways. But yeah, I think we probably were slightly ahead of the time on some things, and
definitely.
You know, sometimes though you don't want to be too ahead of the market. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you sometimes can see that.
You want to kind of come in at the right time as well.
Yeah.
And the demand's like sort of high. You're like, okay, I'm going to take advantage of this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
exactly.
good.
Yeah. Everyone says they want to be the first at things.
But you're like...
But nobody really wants to be the first
Yeah.
a lot of the time, because you can make expensive mistakes.
100%.
I think with our concepts too, we've always tried to go full hog with them, and I think you've really got to do that. Like, I think we've never wanted to be half-hearted.
Right. Yeah.
And look, we were deliberately controversial in as a small companies. You know, our second venue was Maggie's 1980s club, and we couldn't think. We had the concept before the name, but we couldn't think of anyone who was just like absolutely 80s. And Thatcher was obviously Prime Minister 79 to 1990.
Yeah.
And there was something ridiculous about naming a nightclub after someone who probably never went to one. And obviously politics is very, very divisive. And there were as many people who absolutely hated her as who loved her. But it was kind of amusing. And we tried to sort of take the mickey a bit, and, you know, it was her spitting image puppet as the logo. And then we had Kinnock Corner with it, you know. But it enabled us to get page 3 of the Evening Standard.
Yeah.
And as a small company, as a small club, it made a massive noise. And I think we've as a company have quite often punched above our weight in terms of media awareness. And similarly with Bunga Bunga, you know, we were thinking of names, and initially it was going to be called Mamma Mia, and then we thought there'd probably be a lawsuit with ABBA. And it was like this idea that again the concept was there.
Right.
And then we were reading about like Bunga Bunga, and I remember our lawyer for our first licensing kind of application said, can we just drop one of the bungas and just call it Bunga? You know, he's like, you know, this is, you know, utterly ridiculous. But again, it just got us noticed.
Yeah.
Because that name is under the Italian Prime Minister.
Silvio Berlusconi, his slightly risque parties.
Yeah.
But we got sort of
you got
I got hate mail though from people
really?
who were not amused, and
Wow.
you know, we even got a legal letter from a very well-known, I'm not going to say who, Italian fashion designer, because we had her picture on the female loo, and and there was a big news piece in Italy about this venue opening on the main evening news item number 3. She spotted her face there and wasn't so charmed by it. So we actually we had to quite quickly change that up. But you know, I was like, wow, this little pizzeria here in Battersea, we're getting letters like that, so we must be doing something right.
That's right.
And you were, because that was an epic venue.
Yeah.
Fun.
A lot of good times. When did you feel with Inception that you felt like you made it? In terms of like money was flowing, the sort of, you know, had a number of bars. Like, was there a year where you and Duncan were
I don't feel like I have yet, to be honest
Right,
with you. I don't think I've ever felt like that. To be honest with you, you know, we're probably not great at ever being celebrating. I don't know. I think things in our view, you know, can always be better.
Yeah.
I've never left a venue on a night sort of patting myself on the back, thinking,
Right.
"Wow, isn't this amazing?" It's always like, actually, what can we
we do
improve on?
next? Yeah.
Okay.
And if friends email me and say I had a brilliant night, I always reply saying, what was wrong. And I'm not trying to be negative.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't say what was wrong. I say what could have been better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we still feel like we're very early on our journey. I'm always eager to learn. I feel like I'm learning every day.
Yeah.
And want to continue to learn and be inspired and get better. But yeah, I don't think we've ever sort of had that eureka moment. Think we've made it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you know what's so interesting? A lot of the people you speak to in hospitality, no matter what part of it, whether it's an owner of a festival, everybody feels like you've always got to be on alert, high alert, and kind of on your toes. And I think that's a great mindset, because the truth is, in every other business, you were always a bit paranoid about your competitors.
Of course.
You're always a bit worried about all the things that can go wrong. So it's it's interesting to hear you have that mindset.
I think we've had a lot thrown at us as a sector too.
Right.
Interestingly, I've never once worried about competitors, and I don't know if I'm unique we're unique in that way as a business. I don't think we are. I think maybe it's trading in London where there's just so many people, and I've always felt like actually it's a good thing if you've got a few places near each other.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it has irritated me when people completely rip off what we're doing but don't sort of credit it. Actually, if someone says, look, we like that venue, so the way that I'm saying I saw that bar, please don't tell, was inspired by them.
Exactly.
And that gave us a seed, so at least own it,
Yeah.
rather than just sort of
rip
rip you off completely and pass it off as your own work.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of those, but I think we've had a lot thrown at us. We've had sort of COVID.
Right.
A lot of people, that was the hardest year or so of my life, without doubt. Really didn't think we would make it through.
You sort of talk a bit like about that experience. Like, I know it's a deep place to go. But I think
it
it's
was.
really
It was. So it's 5 years, almost to the day.
Yeah.
And so I remember well, because our son had just turned 2, and my wife was pregnant. We had our daughter on the 20th of June 2020. So she was pregnant, and we'd been really lucky. We'd got away for New Year to Marrakesh and had a great. And actually, I remember we sort of toasted like 2020 is going to be a great year,
Right.
and got back, and then obviously the news started, and mid-Jan that there was sort of this strange disease in China. That was when I was sort of first aware of it. But rather naively, I think we thought, that's quite a long way away. That's not going to bother us.
Yep.
Of course. The nature of globalization and travel now means the world's very small.
Yeah.
And then we started seeing, in February, if you like, it was the canary in the coal mine. We started seeing people cancel, and we do a lot of events, so for some big tech companies, and there's a thing in February called International Energy Week where lots of the big global energy companies convene in London, and traditionally we'd always done 4 or 5 big events, but when you've been doing those for 5 years and you budget them in, when they start cancelling, that hurts a lot. And they were all cancelling without wanting to rebook, and so I was like, right, this is
getting serious.
This is getting serious. But our normal customer was just going out, even to the nightclub, like nothing was going on at all.
Yeah.
And I was getting increasingly worried. And then, sort of the second week of March, people started.
Right.
Yeah.
Sales fell off a cliff. And then we spent the whole of Monday in our meeting room, like, how can we cut these costs? Because the cash flow, even with a sort of, I think it was like showing a 35% decline, was looking really bad.
Yeah.
And then we eventually got to a point where we thought we had enough actions, and then there was a news alert. Boris Johnson at 6 p.m. is doing a press conference, and he got up, and it wasn't lockdown at that stage, but it was, do not socialise, do not go to cafes, bars, restaurants and pubs. And I just remember sort of my head in my hands, and we just felt in good faith we couldn't open past that. So we closed earlier that night and didn't feel we could send our staff out.
Right.
And we had a supportive bank. We banked with a challenger bank called Oak North, and we sent them They asked for a forecast, and we'd seen them a few weeks before, and it was on no one's radar really as being sort of a big thing. But I think our initial forecast showed a closure period of 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And they thought that was us being incredibly bearish.
Yeah.
They were like, you know, guys, 12 weeks, we're not going to be close to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if only it had been 12 weeks. Yeah.
All right.
So we then literally had to go into survival mode. It was a tough time. My wife was very close to her grandparents and lost them both to COVID in the first wave. Wow. So we had that. And just it was just pure survival mode for the business. Like, how do you survive? And I think something people don't talk about a lot is, in a way, we were quite fortunate with the timing because we pay our rent used to pay our rent a quarter in advance. So at the end of March, our cash flow is getting to quite a high point. At the beginning of April, it's fairly low. So if COVID had actually happened 3 or 4 weeks later, we would not have been able to meet our payroll.
Right.
Okay.
Because the nature, obviously, with the hospitality business is it's a cash business. So, it's you're constantly, you have that. You're lucky because you're being paid before you have to pay out. So it's quite cash flow positive, which is kind of how everyone operates. Right. But if that gets stopped in its track, to zero, which it did because we had to close.
Of course.
But thankfully, so we made quite quick decisions that, the thing that mattered, number one, was staff got paid. Number two, that our entertainers who aren't staff but relied on us for regular income got paid. Number three, our small suppliers got paid. But sadly, HMRC, big landlords, tricky conversation, but we're going to have to hold payment for now. And I've got to say, you know who your friends are in times like that.
Yeah.
And most of our landlords were absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant.
Actually, even HMRC were very nice.
Wow. They hardly
Shout out. So we had, they were pretty accommodating. It was just by hook or by crook we got through. But we didn't really, there was the big sort of reopening of hospitality in July the 4th, I think it was, of 2020. And for us, that was kind of, it was pretty negligible because, we're central London and, tourists weren't back. People weren't back in their office.
Yeah.
And people weren't really heading in central London. They were staying locally in their neighbourhoods or getting out of town. So I think kind of neighbourhood pubs did quite well. Right. But our business, couldn't really have been worse. Actually, I remember speaking to a girl, a really nice girl I know, and her business is a bull pit bars, and I was thinking her business is probably even worse than mine right now. Yeah. But everything you wanted to grow was like a busy, buzzy hospitality venue, or that became completely contrary to COVID regulation. Yeah. So we had to. We were always quite by the book in terms of, we did everything in terms of all the sort of social distancing, made them COVID ready. So we didn't, on the 4th of July, we only opened one side because it took us time to kind of, we wanted to do it slowly. But it was, the sales were really disappointing. And it wasn't until April of 21 that the momentum. And if you remember, to begin with, it was outside only.
Yeah.
We had a few venues with literally 20 seats, and there were, had
that problem as well.
There was sort of the great Brits showing their love for boozing, and we were incredibly busy, and then it grew and grew. But London's taken a while to get back, and tourism, I think, I was talking to someone last night at a round table, and it's only at 95% of what it was, so it's still not even back to pre-COVID levels. And people are getting back to the office more and more, but Friday, our city site is still, less than half of what it used to do pre-COVID. Yeah. Wow. And yes, you make up for a bit in the week, but not enough. So these things have changed. It feels, well, at least for the medium term. I do think there is going to be more and more of a push back to people being in office. But it took time. It took time for theatres to reopen. So it's and I think the hard thing is, so you come from COVID, which is obviously like climbing Everest, and a lot of people were talking about the Roaring '20s. But we went into that to crazy inflation, and effectively, our costs were going up far quicker than our prices could.
Right.
Yeah.
An energy crisis, a
Yeah.
war in Europe,
Yeah.
a cost of living crisis.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then I think we kind of naively thought a change in government could be a good thing, and they talk the talk very much
Right.
before.
Yeah.
And said they were going to be very pro hospitality and pro growth, and then brought out that budget, which is just making life even harder.
Yeah.
And I think these politicians, they've got to realise they can't tap their slippers and say the word growth 6 times and expect it to happen.
Yeah. That's true. I
So
definitely
true.
agree.
It's
Agree on that one.
Growth
Yeah.
happens through action.
Yeah.
Not
Totally.
through
Yeah.
words. So it's been a tough time. But I think
What would you recommend the government should do to like improve hospitality?
I think there's lots of things. Look, I think there's things they can do which don't cost them any money.
Mm-hmm.
They can deregulate planning.
Yeah.
Let it happen quicker. Let people change of use into hospitality venues. Sadly, a lot of high streets now, retail's had a really tough time.
Yeah.
But a lot of that retail's not coming back because habits have changed. People move online. So let people convert the planning and change of
That's a
use
good idea.
to these buildings. Allow greater use of external areas for hospitality. The al fresco was fantastic outside, and if you compare us to other European cities, we're nowhere near where they are. So that costs them 0, and that actually does achieve growth.
Yeah.
I'd also, we've got 2 million people in this country perennially unemployed, and I think there should be incentives to get them into work.
Yeah.
So think creatively. Okay, so they're currently not paying any national insurance. Maybe have for 3 years, their first 3 years of employment,
Right.
no NI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you occupy a building that hasn't been occupied for 18 months, no rates.
Yeah.
So that actually does achieve growth.
Yeah.
I would also lower VAT. I think even
yeah,
with a
have
lower
to.
rate, there would be more growth. So unfortunately, I think the realization is politicians are not commercial people,
Right.
and they don't quite get business, and we just have to deal with the rules we're given. They've made it a lot harder. Sadly, a lot of smaller businesses aren't gonna. This is going to be the final, the final nail. And the reality is, a lot of businesses like ours took a lot of debt during COVID to be able to survive.
Yeah.
And that the cost of servicing that debt is incredibly expensive now. So that's yet another thing we've all had to deal with. But it's tough. The model is broken. I've got a friend he's got a really successful burger business and fantastic burgers.
Right.
Loved by many, but
Yeah.
he's just like at the point now, like I can't charge 20 quid for a burger,
No.
but I kind of need to,
Of course.
all else being
Yeah.
equal.
Right.
And that's where we're at.
Wow.
That's tough.
That's tough. Yeah.
It's tough. Yeah, because that's the thing. Like, back to your point earlier about when you first started, it's crazy to think as a club promoter, back then, you can make more money than a fixed venue. And we meet a lot of people on the show that are like in that dilemma.
Yeah.
Their dream is to own a fixed venue.
Yeah.
But then when they do the sort of maths and the economics of it, they're kind of like, I don't know if I want to make that leap of faith, and the government's not making it any easier, which is frustrating.
I think it's to feel, it's thinking longer term, and I think there's also fulfillment in life which isn't financial.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I went on this journey because it's been a great experience and I've learned a lot.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
It's been an enjoyable journey, and I think a lot of times people talk about the journey almost being better than getting to the destination.
That's it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Love that.
Love that. So with like all the bars that you have, and you said creating all these experiences, which one would you say is your favourite bar out of all of them?
As I said earlier, I don't feel like I can have a favourite. Like Bart's will always be, like a child. Bart's will always have a special place because it was the first. The brand that we're really doing the most with now is Mr. Fogg's, and I haven't really spoken about Mr. Fogg's yet. So Mr. Fogg's the first one imagined the home of Phileas Fogg, who was this eccentric Victorian traveller. He travelled the world in 80 days in a book written by Jules Verne.
Wow.
And it's a book I read as a kid and always enjoyed it and always imagined who this guy was and always imagined what his house would be like. And he lived in Mayfair, and the site came up in Mayfair, and we recreated his house. And with Mr. Fogg's, we've created a collection, not a chain.
Yeah.
So the idea with the collection is that there's an overarching brand, but each one is slightly different. And by going to one, it gives you the appetite to visit more rather than going to one and feeling like you've done them all.
Yeah.
So that's been the focus. But I think, I think there isn't a favourite. But that's the brand that we're really, kind of starting to roll out and feel like we can do more and more with.
Yeah.
But like, who comes up with these creative ideas? Is it all you, or is it like a team of you sit down and go focus group? Or
do you know what's really nice is, for the first few venues, it was all Duncan and I, and quite often there was mishmash of ideas. Like we've got this other brand called Cahoots, which is 1940s. And I had this idea because it was an underground. We always talk about how, as a business, we can turn a disadvantage into an advantage. There was this bar in an apartment building, no on-street presence, and we turned it into a speakeasy, a secret bar. And then we got this underground bar in Soho, and a lot of time people have an underground bar. They're trying to pretend it's it's sort of a ground floor and putting all these fake lights in. We're like, well, what has to be underground? An underground tube station. And I had this idea. So I was really wanting to do an underground tube station. Duncan really wanted to do this 1940s thing. So we said, well, why don't we do a 1940s underground tube station?
Brilliant.
And it was a mishmash of ideas. The great thing now is nearly all of the best ideas are not ours.
Right.
Like the team, I think we've created a culture where there's no such thing as a bad idea. No matter who you are and how junior or senior you might be.
I love that.
We love getting ideas, and I think there's also that an idea leads to another. So quite often the first idea isn't fully formed or quite right, but it sparks a conversation. Right. I've actually had this morning. We've had a brilliant creative brainstorm for what we're doing with Bunga Bunga, and it's just so nice seeing people, in person. These are never things I want to do virtually, but it's around a table and one idea leads to another, and what about that, and we could do this, and
brilliant.
That's really nice. But the great thing is, for the recent venues, I really take next to no credit.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's great that you can get to that place where people are so inspired by the brand and what you guys are creating. That they want to be part of it,
I'm also realistic. We're getting older now. We're in our 40s. I might be designing nursing homes. That'll be my target market. But I'm a bit past being able to tell people what's good in a nightclub.
That's cool. All right.
Yeah, cool. Well, we're going to change it up a little bit. The pace, and we've got a round that we call quick fire. That is never quick. But it sometimes ends up being the source of some laughter, some counselling for you. So I'm going to hit you with a few questions. So first one, obviously, as you know, hospitality, nightlife, there's always a lot of celebrities that end up sort of in and around the scene. So biggest party animal celeb that's come to one of the bars that you own?
I will tell you a funny story, but my dad's a doctor, and he's always had this kind of patient doctor confidentiality, and it's something I've always said. So do you know what? I've always made a habit. I've never name dropped or discussed celebrities unless it's kind of they've publicly said they've been. So actually, one of the nice things that once happened, and we never talk to the press or anything about people who come to our venues. But one of the nice things was actually I suddenly got this messages in the morning saying, have you been watching Jimmy Kimmel? And I'm like, no, because I'm living and it was the biggest chat show, and it was Margot Robbie on saying that her favourite place to go. She talked about Bunga Bunga for 2 minutes, so that was quite cool. But so I'll tell you a funny story. So we used to have these nights sometimes with lookalikes. So this guy who was a George Michael lookalike, and he used to come and sing occasionally, and he always looked exactly like the real George Michael's when George Michael was still alive. But not only did he look like him, but he also sang exactly. Had an amazing voice, because usually these lookalikes, they might have the look, but they don't really sing. Anyway, he started up. And there were loads of people in there. Everyone's completely convinced this is the real one, including a couple of these sports journalists who were tweeting away, going, "This is the most amazing, emotional moment in London." Anyway, I then get a missed call from a friend of mine the next morning, going, "Charlie, you got to call me back." And I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Well, my PA has just come into work, and she said, Alan, George Michael is not gay." And
what?
It's like what? He goes, and he's so down to earth. he stays in a Holiday Inn at Wandsworth Roundabout. So this girl.
Oh god.
Anyway, it was very funny.
Oh,
It was
God.
very funny. So this guy, had obviously had fun pretending to be him. But,
We're going to see a Netflix
Yeah,
show
definitely.
about this individual one day.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so celebrity wise, as I say, it's just, I think what we've always tried to do is create spaces they can come and we can be discreet. And, they're paying customers,
Right.
and I think that's probably why Margot Robbie sort of spoke about us, because she probably realised she'd been coming for years and we never discussed anything, and,
Right.
and she'd always been able to come and go, and that was kind of very kind of her. She did that kind of payback, completely unexpected, but that's the only reason I can mention it, because she was very publicly spoke about it.
Oh, amazing. All right. Brilliant. Great story. Alive or dead, who would you love to have come to one of the bars and also you to have had a drink with them?
Do you know, I would get probably Jules Verne, the creator of Phileas Fogg Around the World, and I would get him back, and I would ask him, I would say, Jules, is this the kind of house that you would imagine in your mind Phileas living in? I'd get him. And people always ask about Alive or Dead, who would you have a dinner party? Actually, I would love to have met my grandparents. Like I only got to know to know one of my grandparents, and I hear a lot about them.
Right.
And those are probably the people I choose to go and have a drink with the most.
Amazing.
Oh, that's amazing.
Love that.
That's very different. We never had that
that's,
one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, what club, bar, or hospitality experience do you look at and go like, wow, you guys have created something super cool, and do you wish you would have created?
I just there's so much in London, just so many. I'm always really in admiration of more food-led businesses. I think we're good drinks operators, but we only do food to a small degree. I mean, in terms of, went to Oma in Borough recently, this new Greek restaurant. Just won a star last week, and think that's absolutely amazing. I've got a great friend called Phil Windsor who's creating these amazing pubs. He's got the Pelican in Notting Hill, the Hero in Maida Vale. I think they're really, really beautiful. I'm a big admirer of what Nick Jones has done.
Yeah.
I think Soho House is it's incredible. People knock it a lot, but actually the look, the feel, the global expansion, and the idea of that, and members clubs.
Totally.
At the very highest end, I think Robin Burley does it best. He's got number 5 Hertford Street. He's got a wine club called Oswald's. He's opening in New York, but I think he's the very, very top of his game, and I admire how well he treats his staff, and that people really stay with him for years and years.
That tells you a lot, right,
Yeah.
about a
Yeah.
business operator when
Yeah.
you get people like you talked about your bar manager that progressed through the company and was there for like 12 years. It's a long time.
Yeah.
14,
14 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
14 years. Yeah, that's a phenomenal amount of time. When you think about someone's working career,
No, exactly.
that's such a huge amount of time. So
You
it's
get
testament.
less for murder.
right, exactly.
Right.
And then in terms of you're a well-known entrepreneur. Like, are there any brands or creatives or entrepreneurs that you would love to collaborate with?
I think my big hero in hospitality is a guy called Danny Meyer, and Danny Meyer is a big US restaurateur. He's started Union Square Cafe. He's got I think about 10, 15 restaurants.
Right.
And then he's got Shake Shack, which is obviously his big play. But he wrote a book called Setting the Table.
Okay.
And I give managers a copy of this book, and he talks about the difference between hospitality and service.
Right.
Service is a transaction. Service is how you get A to B. Service you can get from a vending machine. Hospitality is a way you make people feel.
Right.
And that is a key distinction. And he talks about hospitalitarians, and he talks about the difference between a facilitator and a gatekeeper. Quite often it's can be a frustration with the security companies you use, because they're third parties, and they're not there. They're there because they have to be on the license, but we want them to be facilitators.
Right.
Just how can you welcome people, and they're the first interaction. And the last. It's so important. A nice good evening, or thank you for coming, rather than a gatekeeper to kind of keep you out. He's someone who I think defines hospitality really, really well, and he has some amazing stories in his book, and he talks about this couple who drive from upstate New York to his restaurant, Union Square Cafe, and it was their 40th wedding anniversary, and they had bought a bottle of this, sort of spoke to the sommelier when they sat down and said, just a quick question, I've realised I bought this 40-year-old bottle of Krug champagne and I put it in my freezer at home. How long will it last? And the sommelier sort of says, well, an hour and a half, I'm afraid. It will explode after that. And he says, I'm going to have to go back. I've spent $2,500 on this bottle. Well, the sommelier says, give me your address, give me your car keys. And he sends his number 2 up to their house to take the bottle of Krug from the freezer into the fridge. And when they come back, they also find a tub of caviar, a thing of truffles, and a card saying, happy 40th wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
Those people who are going to be one-off customers apparently came back every single month, and they sent hundreds of people, and they dined out on the store.
Yeah.
And yes, that was an expensive gesture. Probably cost him $500, but he says he probably made that investment back 1,000 times over.
Definitely.
And I think that's a good lesson, and something we try and emulate, not to such an extravagant degree so far, but we haven't had something like that. But if someone leaves their phone, or we had someone recently, his passport, they suddenly realised was there. We didn't sort of say, computer says no one's in the venue till 6. We've got our maintenance team to go and retrieve it and then courier it over at our cost. But that really went above and beyond, and I think people notice these things.
Yeah, the little touches that I think at times, to your point earlier about just not getting obsessed about the finances of hospitality, like they matter so much, and people remember them, and and I know social people are divided a bit on it, but like people, that's the sort of thing. Those guys sound a bit the older generation, 40 years, but like a lot of a younger generation will be tweeting that or
telling everyone about
on Instagram,
it.
and the promotion that gets for companies. It's a great example of reminding us all.
I remember one of our really loyal customers, and he enjoyed a certain type of cognac, and he'd been coming a lot, and just we didn't tell him. But he used to come with his husband to the venue, and we used to we kind of found out both of their initials through their bookings. And as a surprise, when they next came to the venue, they were both presented with glasses with their initials, but we didn't say anything about it. Nice. We just poured the cognac. And that really, that really sort of, kind of blew him away. And I think those little touches, in the big scheme of things, they're not hugely expensive. Right. No. But Danny always talks about, in his book, he talks about pulling things to center. So his, you asked me, like, about, are you happy and celebrating, feel like you made it? Things can always be better. And he always says his analogy is pulling things to center, because he always looks at the salt and pepper on a table and he says, are they exactly central? And they never quite are. So but that's his analogy of what he's constantly trying to do with his business. And I think that's kind of what, as a founder, you have to keep doing. It's like, you need to tweak that a bit, and the lighting, and lighting, music, all those sorts of things. I'm very, it can never be too dark almost for me in a venue. I just always like turn it down, turn the lights down. And I get a bit obsessed about this period of the evening when the sun's going down. You've got to be really quick, right? Because the vent, you need to turn it can be too bright very quickly. And so you have to be on that light switch. I've got better. I used to get up and start fiddling with the lights myself. And I now sit on my hands and sort of mention it.
That's it. Founders, we've all been founders here, and you've got to let go sometimes.
You have to. It creates an atmosphere.
Yeah.
The lighting, the music, everything's there. So
do you know what? When the lighting goes down, you hear people talk louder.
Yeah.
It creates chatter in a room. If it's bright, people feel too self-conscious. They don't want to. It's darker. They talk louder. There's music goes up. It can completely change an atmosphere.
Totally. Yeah. Well, you survived quickfire. I told you it was not quick, but that's brilliant. Some great stuff in there. We want to incriminate you now, Charlie.
Yeah.
We want to know what a Charlie night out looks like, where you go, who you're with. People in hospitality, a lot of the time people get into it because they generally love going out, being social, hanging out, meeting new people. All those things are true of a lot of people in hospitality. So,
do you know what? I think at the moment with a 11-week-old baby and 2 young kids, my big nights out are very few and far between. I think in terms of the bar I absolutely love going to, and if it's not one of our own, it's Duke's in.
Yeah.
And there's the bar manager Alessandro Palazzi, who's I think been the bar manager there for over 20 years. Amazing guy, and it's an amazing bar. I mean, their martinis are lethal. I mean, it feels like about half a litre of gin. He swirls the glass with vermouth and then pours it onto the floor. And you're only allowed 2 martinis.
Okay.
So you cannot be served more than 2. You can have other drinks after, but trust me, after one, you're flying. Yeah. You're absolutely
for Charlie.
Flying. But in terms of bars, that's where I love to get a little bit of rocket fuel at the start. But my favourite thing is like a really long lunch. Right. I love a long lunch. Yeah. And I don't have stable favourites really. I love trying new places, and I'm always kind of. I went to Calais last week, the little Thai small place in Borough. I mentioned Omar already, just this amazing Greek restaurant. I went to Clipstone a couple of weeks ago in Fitzrovia. Just love kind of great food. That's kind of my my favourite thing is a very long lunch with a lot of rosé. Right. And I can be back for. Not for X Factor, but probably back for kids' bath time.
Yeah, right. That sounds about right. So, in terms of like one of the things in hospitality that we all know, things always go wrong.
Yeah.
Like we'd love to hear some stories that probably gave you nightmares and sleepless nights at the time, but we'll put a smile on.
I mean, there's so many. I remember the very first night at Kit's, the DJ didn't turn up.
Oh, God.
And it was a Friday night, and I didn't know what to do, and I'm not particularly good on the music side, and couldn't find anything. One of the doormen had an iPod, but it turned out he was into really like heavy metal.
Okay.
And then the only other song that I knew was "Sexy Back" by Justin Timberlake. And by the third time I played that, people were coming up to the DJ booth threatening me that if I played that once more, I would get smacked. So that was pretty bad. Look, stuff goes wrong. Stuff goes wrong all the time, and our brilliant ops team spend their life firefighting. Right. The reality is with hospitality venues is. From the electrics to the water, something can fail. And these are commercial units, and the same way things go wrong in a house. Think how much use all these things are getting. So things regularly go wrong, but it's how you deal with them. Yeah, I love that. I bet whenever that song comes on, you're like, oh, no. Turn it off. Yeah. And I saw Justin Timberlake. Gives me shivers. Yeah.
So, like, a lot of people want to like get involved in opening bars and restaurants, but they don't understand the challenges that basically comes when you open one. Can you go through like a strategy or ideas that can come up whilst they're opening? Yeah, I think I'm always amazed sometimes people come to me and they say, look, I really want to open a place. This is my plan. And their plan is to open a 25,000 square foot, 5-story bar and restaurant. And I'm sort of like, I would start a lot smaller. And look, I started with a squash court. And it's very busy to make a squash court look busy. Very easy to make a squash court look busy. Yeah. And we started small, and we built a buzz. And I personally guaranteed the rent, but the rent was 10 grand a year initially. So on the great scheme of things, it was pretty low. I think the way to start and to trial something is start by doing a pop-up. Start by doing having a stall at a market. Trial things that way. Don't go straight in, sign a lease. You've got to, and I think that's the great thing about social media now is you can get a following. Whether you look at a great pizza brand like Pizza Pilgrims, those guys, really nice guys, Tom and James, they started the business just on a little pizza oven on the back of a scooter, which they did in a market, and then got the confidence to open their first pizzeria. Yeah. And then, I think now the 30, 40 sites. But that's the way to do it. And I think you can really test something and you can really de-risk something that way. Yeah. And then you go in with that following, having had kind of proof of concept. But that would be my big bit of advice. And start small. Start with a small play and don't run before you can walk. Yeah, 100%.
Advice.
And the other thing I think we've never had an investor, so we've grown organically, and I think people can sell out too quickly.
Yeah.
And investors come with their own challenges, and you see a lot of great businesses go wrong because they've taken all this investment. Most investors' only imperative is a financial return, and they are pushing for growth and non-sustainable growth, and actually pushes people to open more sites than they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because for the first 7 years we didn't even have a bank. Every site, for our first 7 sites, we did one a year, but everyone had to work. The one before, had to be profitable before we could move on to the next one, which is a really good,
That's the
really
right
good
way to do
discipline.
it, really.
Yeah, it's a really good discipline. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Cool. So in terms of like looking back over the time that you've been in the game, like what's sort of the biggest learning or a mistake that you made that sort of, really sort of has shaped the success, do you think?
I think, look, we've made so many mistakes, and you learn through failure and mistakes. But we'd opened Maggie's, this 1980s club. It was a huge success. It was kind of, in Chelsea in a different area. And then we thought we'd kind of almost replicate that. And we opened this club in Soho called Disco. And it just wasn't the same area, wasn't the same neighbourhood.
Yeah.
It was fairly busy, but only for sort of 9 hours a week, nightclub hours between 12 and 3, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And we just weren't getting the kind of level of spend that we kind of got in this other neighbourhood club. But I think what I'm really proud that we did collectively as a company is we then I think you've got to sometimes realise when something's not working. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. You spend 80% of your time thinking about it. And actually it was dragging everything else down because we were spending all this time and resource. Like, how do we rescue disco? And then I think we eventually came up with this other concept, which was Cahoots, which I was talking about, this underground tube station. That was when that came about. And Cahoots is probably it's a hugely successful brand now. The one in our Soho site there. We created the tube station, but we also then have taken the big site opposite, tunneled through to double the size of the tube station to create a ticket hall pub above, and now we've opened a big one.
That's brilliant.
Now we've opened a big one in Borough. So that was a site that was a failure, and that was a site that I think a lot of people would have just given back the keys, but we thought actually, this hasn't worked. And I think the other beauty with it is a lot of the cost sometimes of a refurbishment is all the slightly boring stuff. It's like the extract, it's like the sound, the sound system, the wiring, the electrics. So that had all been done. So whilst it was demoralizing having to rip out like kind of the decor for disco, like a lot of the foundations we still used in Cahoots. So it's still the same sound system. I think that's definitely been a learning. When something's not working, accept it, move on. But also, just because something works in one area, if it's quite niche, you can't necessarily replicate it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so interesting, that story, because when something's quite emotional for people in business, you can end up holding on too long. And not, like, I've definitely done it myself. Where I've had a media business that I know I need to get rid of, but it's emotional to you and stuff, and that such a great bit of advice, because you can hold on too long just purely out of emotion and then not make the pivot that you made and then create all this success. I mean, it's great advice.
I think just sometimes you just get that sense of things just don't have momentum, and it's not a nice place to be. And look, I had club nights where I'd invited my good friends, and I had to sit in an empty club, with sort of with 10 of us, wondering, and
is anyone to turn up?
And they didn't, and I had an absolute disaster. And it happened, and it's a very, very uncomfortable situation to be in. But
talk about resilience. There.
You got to learn from that.
Your mates will be taking the piss as well.
They still do.
Your mates, they come to your party, they support you. They drink some free drinks. but they take the piss when.
I had a night up at Edinburgh Uni called Ignition, which was the biggest failure, and we used to start and end that night with that song Ignition, and it was a complete disaster.
Amazing.
It was usually just me sitting there with my free bottle of vodka.
It turned out all right though. It turned out all right. In terms of like how you stay inspired and motivated, you know, the industry moves, it evolves all the time. Like, how do you stay sort of so motivated?
I think with our concepts and things, we're not trying to be completely on trend and design wise. We've created these quite timeless concepts. So Maggie's looks like it's the 1980s. You know, if there was an avalanche and, you know, archaeologists dug up Maggie's in years to come, I'd like to think they think that was a 1980s time capsule that had been there forever. So we're not constantly trying to adapt, you know, and similar with Mr. Fogg's, we're creating a Victorian,
right?
And everyone else is doing this minimalist interiors at the moment. We're very maximalist in our look and feel. So I think you know we keep up with obviously kind of trends in social media a little bit. We keep up with the younger generation in terms of, you know, what's important to them, and, you know, I think we've, you know, really taking, you know, mental health very seriously. I've recently become a mental health first aider, and I've got all of our leadership team and all of our managers to do that. So look, I'm always kind of conscious of stuff out there, but we're I think we've got to stay relevant. Obviously, we've got to keep pushing the boundaries. I think, you know, we've realised with Bunga Bunga that it was just growing a bit tired, and it needed a breath of fresh air. And so we're really excited. We're completely reworking that concept,
nice,
and relaunching it with fresh energy. And I think people will love it. But we've also learnt so much in the last 10 years since we did it. And actually, you were to go to our new Cahoots in Borough, which the team have done. I mean, it's amazing. And there's we send cocktails to the tables on these air tubes, so you can we've created a postal sorting office,
right? That's wicked.
And the cocktail gets sent from the bar and lands at your table through this tube. It's amazing. Right. But I think that tube system now has had over 200 million views on TikTok. And it just shows you get something like that now. So I think being aware of also trends. TikTok obviously didn't exist when Bart's opened. That was more about Twitter and people talking about how you find us. Now things are more visual, and you know, I think initially it was about the kind of pictures, but now it's about videos, and that's how people see things. You know. Printed media is not so important, you know. The only person that sends me printed media with a post-it note is my mum. You know, it's people don't see things that way. People share things online.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. And in terms of like what's next for Inception Group, like what's the future got in store for you guys?
I think we're just gonna keep growing. We'd love to get out of London. We'd love to get looking at cities like Manchester and Birmingham.
Glasgow. Go look at Glasgow.
Glasgow,
booming at the moment.
Yeah, Glasgow. I've heard I'm actually going up there in a few months' time. Edinburgh would be another great city. At uni there. And also looking at maybe we could do stuff out of the UK.
Right.
Looking at the UAE, it's a really exciting place at the moment.
Cool,
love to do something in America at some point. So hopefully that's kind of, you know, and I think that would be a really exciting next challenge for us to try and grow into. But we're going to keep doing what we're doing. I think, you know, we like to think that we're a great company to work for. Keep growing great teams, and I think something I'm really proud of is our learning development program within the business, and that most of our general managers have come through our system. They've been trained by us, and it's really nice to see that internal progression.
Yeah, amazing. No, that's great to hear.
So, like, what type of advice would you give to someone like, with all the experience and stuff? What would you say to them? These are like the rules to follow in this business.
I think it's really important to create a point of difference. I think you've got to create your own. I mean, we've always tried to see things a little bit differently, but you know, you just look at so many sort of carbon copy people, and they sort of, you know, I remember when we set up our first bar, Bart's. I looked at all the bars that were in a 15-minute walk, and there were about 30 of them. And I printed pictures of them, and I stuck them all onto a big sheet of card. And I asked lots of people, what is that venue? And no one said, these are 20 different venues. because they all looked exactly the same. They had the same furniture from the same provider, same tea light candles, and the same glassware. So I think, create a point of difference, do things differently, believe in what you do, because if you don't believe in it, people won't follow you, and that's both staff and customers. Surround yourself with people who are good at the things you're not. I learned very quickly with Duncan with a clicker.
Right.
And enjoy it, because we spend so much of our time working that you've got to love what you do. It's a fantastic sector. It's I feel very lucky. There's so many areas that we touch on, whether it's through property, travel, food, drink, music, design. It encompasses so many different things. I think you really feel like you've achieved when a day at work, it doesn't feel like one.
Right. Amazing. Well, for somebody who has got an 11-week-old baby,
you did well.
and hasn't had much sleep, mate, that has been phenomenal.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for the coffee.
Oh, no, Charlie, thank you so much. It's been
Cheers,
an
guys.
absolute pleasure of a conversation. I mean, the knowledge that's been shared today has been unbelievable. So thank you,
Pleasure.
mate.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you.